Rod wanted me to start off with reading this little article about celebrating the Festival of Lights. So I'm going to read it, okay? The Jewish celebration of Hanukkah is often associated with the Christian holiday of Christmas. Well, this year it fell on Thanksgiving, which was unusual. But that association has little to do with the significance of each holiday and more to do with the timing. Each is celebrated at the end of the year when the holiday season has hit full swing. But much like the story of Christmas, the story of Hanukkah is a rich one. The celebration of Hanukkah has a deep history that can be traced back to a successor of Alexander the Great. Upon conquering Syria, Egypt, Palestine, Alexander the Great allowed these lands to remain relatively autonomous, a gesture that extended to allowing residents of these conquered lands to observe their own religions. However, more than 100 years later, how do you say it, Antiochus? Yeah, that's how I say it. The fourth, a less tolerant successor of Alexander, began to oppress the Jewish people under his control, desecrating their temples and even ordering the massacre of many Jews. This treatment eventually sparked a revolt led by Mattathias of the Hasmonean and his son Judah Maccabee. This revolt would ultimately prove successful and the temple was rededicated. But at the time of rededication, oil needed to light the menorah was very low, roughly enough to keep the menorah lit for just one night. However, the oil stunningly lasted for 8 days, enough time to prepare an additional supply of oil for the menorah. An 8-day festival was then declared to celebrate this miracle, and that festival is now known as Hanukkah, which is often referred to as the Festival of Lights. Though Hanukkah is not as religiously significant as the Jewish holidays of Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, and Passover, many Jewish people still look forward to the holiday and its traditions. One such tradition for many families is cooking potato latkes, a relatively easy yet delicious food that Hanukkah celebrants can enjoy on weekend mornings when gathered around the breakfast table. You ever had a latke? It's like a fried pancake.
Oh, potato cake?
Yeah,
Oh,
like
yeah,
a
I've
potato
had that.
pancake. Yeah.
Yeah, they're pretty, yeah. I saw that in merchandise.
That's
I thought
something
that
at the merchant, that was.
was pretty easy. I'll just clip that out and bring it along.
You want to read that little thing about the condos? Oh, I was going to lead into it. All right. Well, I hope I don't disappoint you that we're not going to do the chapter 2 tonight, because I found something that we wanted to that I wanted to kind of hear off and bring to you, because I thought it was significant and kind of important, and it just brings us up to date on more of the recent things and what's happening. Okay, I saw a headline and it said, and it was today, and it said, Iraq is dying from depleted uranium poisoning. Have you heard that?
No, I didn't know that.
Well, when I read that, I thought, something clicked in me, and I thought, I go by the leading of, this is something that you all probably maybe haven't heard of or something, but it's significant. So I thought we'll set aside chapter 2 for later, and because we're going to start into the letters to the churches. But here's the news brief. A look at Iraq 10 years after Saddam. This was because they were having some kind of a convention over there to look back and see what's happened to the country since then. Iraq has been torn by 10 years of the most brutal warfare imaginable by the American-led coalition, creating political and religious anger that has given rise to militant popularity within the population. In the early years of the Bush invasion, one of the major developments would be the loosening of controls over ethnic groups, which dictator Saddam Hussein had successfully accomplished. The three major groups, the Shiites, the Sunni, and the Kurds, are now reasserting themselves as the last American troops leave the country. And now, Iraq, ancient Babylon, is nearing the end times final annihilating judgment, just as God foretold 27 years ago in Isaiah 13. Did you ever tie that in with prophecy? It's called, you know how they say the oracle against Damascus that's coming in Isaiah 17? Well, this is called the burden of Babylon. The noise, I'm gonna read that prophecy in Isaiah 13. Verse 1, not every single verse, I'll tell you what verse. Verse 1, the burden of Babylon. Verse 4, see if you can tie it in with what's happening now as I read it. The noise of a multitude in the mountains, like as of a great people. The tumultuous noise of the kingdoms of nations gathered together. The Lord of hosts mustereth the host of the battle. Make no mistake who's orchestrating this. Verse 5, they come from a far country, from the end of heaven, even the Lord and the weapons of his indignation to destroy the whole land. Howl ye, for the day of the Lord is at hand. It shall come as a destruction from the Almighty. Verse 7, therefore shall all hands be faint, and every man's heart shall melt. And they shall be afraid. Pangs and sorrows shall take hold of them. They shall be in pain as a woman that travaileth. They shall be amazed at one another. Their faces shall be as flames. Behold, the day of the Lord cometh. Now, you know when this is talking about. When's the day of the Lord? 70th week of Daniel, the great tribulation halfway through. Behold, the day of the Lord cometh, cruel both with wrath and fierce anger, to lay the land desolate, and he shall destroy the sinners thereof out of it. For the stars of heaven and the constellations thereof shall not give their light. The sun shall be darkened in his going forth, and the moon shall not cause her light to shine. And I will punish the world for their evil, and the wicked for their iniquity. And I will cause the arrogancy of the proud to cease, and will lay low the haughtiest of the terrible. I will make a man more precious than fine gold, even a man than the golden wedge of Ophir. What's the golden wedge of Ophir? As I'm going down through this, I always go and I research something I don't understand. Ophir, O-P-H-I-R, was a port or a region mentioned in the Bible famous for its wealth. King Solomon is supposed to have received a cargo of gold, silver, sandalwood, precious stones, ivory, apes, and peacocks from Ophir every 3 years. Ophir is also the name of a descendant of Noah. Perhaps he founded the land of Ophir. Verse 12 says, even a man would be more precious than gold in Ophir, meaning that the city and nation shall be so depopulated that a man would be as rare or dear as gold. Verse 13, therefore I will shake the heavens, and the earth shall remove out of her place. Has this ever happened before? In the wrath of the Lord of hosts and in the day of his fierce anger. What day is this speaking of? The day of the Lord, great tribulation in the 70th week of Daniel, before the second coming. Verse 14, and it shall be as the chaste roe, and as a sheep that no man taketh up, or shepherds. They shall every man turn to his own people, his family, and flee every one into his own land. Keep that in mind, fleeing. And Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the beauty of the Chaldees' excellency, shall be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah, which is to say, destroyed. It shall never be inhabited, just like Damascus. So it hasn't happened yet. It shall never be inhabited, neither shall it be dwelt in from generation to generation. Her time is near, and her days shall not be prolonged. Now, how does this tie in with Iraq today? So we see in Isaiah 13, God foretold that the unprecedented foreign armies, American coalition, coming from a far land, which attacked latter-day Babylon in Iraq, would seize and destroy the entire land. I can understand how an invading army could seize the whole land, but how does an army destroy an entire land? Well, the coalition forces which invaded Iraq on March 20th, 2003, and did not leave until December 2011, daily deployed depleted uranium munitions against the Iraqi people. How can depleted uranium destroy an entire land? Well, the coalition forces were armed with a new weapon, depleted uranium weaponry, DUW. It's a weapon system of unparalleled destruction. Have you heard this before?
No.
Yeah.
I see you nodding. It has been predicted that between 1 and 10 years, many soldiers who served in the coalition forces would die. And within 20 years, Iraq would be totally inhabitable to human beings.
Uninhabitable, you mean?
Uninhabitable. Sorry, uninhabitable. It was also predicted that so many people would begin migrating from Iraq that other countries would start refusing to allow these sick people to come across the border into their country. Some of the migration is occurring from the civil war between the Shiite and Sunni, but many are also migrating because they can no longer live in a country whose water, soil, and air is contaminated by depleted uranium. So how do you die by depleted uranium? Back in August 2005, there was a news report. It said, Baghdad, thousands of people were left suffocating as a massive sandstorm brought life in the war-torn Iraqi capital to a virtual standstill. Nearly 1,000 cases of suffocation were reported at the city's Yarmouk hospital. Hundreds of other people visited private clinics and family doctors as a fog-like cloak of orange dust sat over the city. Traffic came to a virtual standstill. Those who dared step out wore masks or covered their mouths. Even the Baghdad's main airport was shut with no flights taking off.
When was this? Because I didn't hear about it.
2005. In August 2005. I was over there in 2005 watching Ariel Sharon get the troops prepared to go into Gaza and withdraw from Gaza. So all this was taking place, and I don't remember a whole lot in the news about Baghdad. It was more focused on Gaza. This sandstorm was so unusually heavy that it was described as a freak compared to normal sandstorms that blow through the area. For instance, during the first 3 weeks of fighting after our initial invasion in 2003, battles were abandoned on both sides at least twice because sandstorms whipped through the area. And this was a freaky one. But what is the scientific and lethal nature of depleted uranium dust? Understanding this will make it clear how a sandstorm like the one just described could become an instrument of death. Depleted uranium is what's left over when most of the highly radioactive types, isotopes, of uranium are removed for use as nuclear fuel or nuclear weapons. The depleted uranium used in armor-piercing munitions and in enhanced armor protection for some of the Abrams tanks is also used in the civilian industry, primarily for stabilizers in airplanes and boats. Depleted uranium is a heavy metal that's also radioactive. Heavy metals, uranium, lead, tungsten, etc., have chemical toxicity properties that in high doses can cause adverse health effects. Depleted uranium that remains outside the body cannot harm you, It is virtually inert before it's fired off. However, once depleted uranium is used in battle, the dangerous contamination begins. Almost 15 years ago, the Pentagon decided to start using depleted uranium extensively in our munitions. Depleted uranium was dirt cheap since it was leftover material from processing uranium into nuclear weapons and was normally just thrown away in specially built containers in which all handling was done with men wearing special radiation protection suits because in the commercial field this stuff is considered toxic waste. Depleted uranium also possessed possessed one other characteristic that made it very useful to a modern fighting force. It is extremely dense and pyrophoric, which enables it to punch and burn its way through hard targets such as tanks. Therefore, depleted uranium is used extensively in all armor-piercing munitions. Once exploded, depleted uranium munitions turn instantly into fine dust. This dust then mixes with that dust mixes with regular dust and contaminates it on the ground and starts to kill civilians who breathe it into their lungs, causing the onset of slow, agonizing radioactive death. Thus, when a person travels through a battlefield, they breathe in the particles that are now lingering in the air. When a DU shell is fired, it ignites upon impact. Uranium plus traces of plutonium and I don't know how to say that, it's chemical, vaporize into tiny ceramic particles of radioactive dust. Once inhaled, uranium oxidizes and lodge in the body and emit radiation indefinitely. A single particle of depleted uranium lodged in a lymph node can devastate the entire immune system. Anyone who inhales or swallows high levels of DU can suffer kidney failure within days. Others who breathe in lesser amounts do not suffer immediately, but have a high chance of breathing it in enough to cause serious problems later on. How many are contaminated with depleted uranium residue? The answer is anyone who was or is now in Iraq who has not inhaled lethal radioactive dust is not breathing. So everybody has it. This means every single soldier and every single civilian has tiny particles of depleted uranium dust lodged in their lungs, emitting radioactivity throughout their body 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Here's a picture, I don't know if you can see it too well because it's light, of soldiers that look like they're praying. This was taken over there. These soldiers appear to be praying, but what they are doing is waiting out a sandstorm. And as you can see, none of them have their faces covered or are wearing masks. They are breathing in the dust as it swirls around them. Countries within a 1,000-mile radius of Baghdad and Kabul are being affected by radiation poisoning. This doesn't even mention Japan and the nuclear plant that's now wafting over into the west coast.
Oh, Japan is toast.
Today, Iraq is thoroughly and heavily contaminated with uranium poisoning at the level where life cannot be sustained for very many years. Further, this type of contamination lasts for 4.5 billion years. The winds are blowing this radiated dust 1,000 miles to the southeast if the Sharkey or Sirocco winds are blowing, and to the northwest if the Shamal winds are blowing. Therefore, all of the non-integrating, there are certain terms we're going to get into here. Therefore, all of the non-integrating states to the southeast and northwest of Iraq and Afghanistan are being irradiated. Now wait, what's meant by non-integrating states? You know how we go off on the rabbit trails to tie it all in together. We talked about the Illuminati before. Who are the Illuminati? It's supposed to be the far-fetched conspiratorial secret society of the wealthy and intellectual movers and shakers of the banking, political, and media worlds, right? Are you all familiar with that? Sometimes I think people are going to think, oh, she's a nut, and not come back here anymore. According to the Illuminati, there are only two types of nations in the world today. Number one, nations who are already functioning in the new global system who are clearly and firmly going in that direction, called the functioning core. Number two, or the other kind, nations who are not now functioning in the global system and are not likely to do so in the foreseeable future, unless they are kicked into it by the U.S. or European troops, or by the threat of invasion. Wars and rumors of wars. These nations are called the non-integrating gap. Have you all studied anything about this? It gets really conspiratorial, but it's happening, so it's not a conspiracy. The strategy being implemented by the United States and the European Union is to shrink the gap. In other words, for those who care to look, they will see that the Pentagon's strategy has and is determining where America has gone to war, with whom, and for what purpose since the attacks of 9/11. Keep in mind, the Clintons, the Bushes, Kissinger, even Netanyahu, are all members of the Illuminati. They follow a plan. They have been placed in the offices they're in, and they are pledged to follow the strategy. This is why there is really no difference in political parties. We only think we're electing them. Keep in mind, George Bush Sr. was groomed for 2 terms, but only got 1. He was set aside for violating the premature announcement of a new world order.
I remember him saying that.
Say it? And his 1,000 points of light. Clinton succeeded for his 2 terms of peace and prosperity. George W., he was a reluctant member. I read his book. He mentions how he did not want to join this and that and the other, all this stuff. But he did because he was following the protocol of his father and everything. But he did get saved. George Bush did get saved. Billy Graham led him to salvation. And he says that in his book. And from what I read, because he wrote it himself, and you know how he speaks? He writes like he speaks. So when I read it, I felt it was genuine, what he read about being saved. He had always thought that, he said that he always thought salvation was kind of getting your act together and becoming a good person. But he learned otherwise from Billy Graham.
That's awesome.
So George W., who was albeit a reluctant member, also followed the script to narrow the gap of the non-integrating nations. Using 9/11 as the excuse, President Bush welded America as the superpower battering ram to knock down those nations who are really standing in the way of fully implementing the New World Order. The Y2K scare was designed to force governments all across the world, rich and poor alike, to upgrade their computer systems so that they can all plug into the economy of this coming global system. You know, it was a bust. We all thought everything was going to come to a stop. They
We
had
need
a
our case
plan.
of Hershey bars by February.
I still have some. Hillary was supposed to be rewarded with the next presidency, and it certainly looked like she was going to be the Democratic nominee. But perhaps Hillary was seen as being too tied to the prosperity that was evident while her husband was president. But it was apparently decided that Obama was to be the man to take the country down. Obama is following his script laid out by the Illuminati. He is not acting on his own. The major part of the script written for him is to actively dismantle America's foreign policy and military power. And boy, is he going at it. He is getting rid of all the generals now. But it goes deeper than that. Obama is destroying America from within. He is also using America consistent with the Illuminist guiding spirit. This ties in to what we talked about with the angels over the cities, the angels over the churches. The Illuminist guiding spirit principle that demonic guiding spirits would establish America as an occultic nation so that she would gradually move all nations of the world into the satanic system known as the New World Order. Are we seeing that principle being established? Unequivocally, yes. Obama is very much like President Jimmy Carter was, who also dismantled America's military. When I read this part, well, I didn't read it, I wrote it, but when I was getting the pieces together, it just, even though it's like dire predictions and all, I get all excited because it's like, yeah, oh, it tied in, it's there, it's there. Oh, you know,
I get it.
this is why it happened, this is why it happened. So see if you get it like I do. Obama is very much like President Jimmy Carter, who also dismantled America's military and directed a weakening of our diplomacy overseas. I loved it when they released those hostages to Reagan and not him. In fact, Carter so depleted America's military that President Reagan, and here's where it comes in, President Reagan was able to launch a major rebuilding effort, an effort which replaced the old equipment that Carter retired with brand new state-of-the-art military, got your GPS systems from him, which was now armed with depleted uranium weaponry. Now, it had to come in from somewhere to tie into God's plan. So you can see how all these little things that seem unrelated all start coming together. It's almost like having the hindsight before you look backward, you know? I don't know if I said that right, but you know what I mean. Without Reagan's new depleted uranium military, President Bush could not have initiated the fulfillment of Isaiah 13 that ancient Babylon's land would eventually be destroyed. And so,